Video 3, Coding. Coding is the process of organizing chunks of your data into meaningful categories, what we call themes. There are 3 different approaches you can take when it comes to creating codes in NVivo: predefined, line by line, and auto-coding. Let's examine these approaches by going back to the earlier climate change example. You might already have a codebook, a predefined list of categories or themes you're looking for in the data. This codebook might list themes such as rising sea levels, forest fires, or excessive flooding. With a predefined codebook, you create your codes before you start reading. Then, as you go through your material, you assign sections of text to the appropriate code. This is called predefined coding. Another approach is called line-by-line coding. In this case, you don't start with a list of codes. You will have a specific research question in mind, but you don't want to restrict your analysis to pre-established themes. Instead, you read through your data line by line. If something you read connects to a code you've already created, you'll assign it to that same code, usually by dragging your selection onto it. If it's something new, you'll create a new code on the spot. The third type of coding is called auto-coding. This is when NVivo uses machine-based algorithms to scan your sources, looking at the content and sentence structure to automatically identify themes. You can review and fine-tune the results afterwards. Auto-coding for themes is only available in the Windows version of NVivo, but in practice, the results often lack nuance, so I don't generally recommend using it. And lastly, you can incorporate all 3 types of coding into a project if it suits your needs. In this workshop, we'll be using line-by-line coding, reading through each transcript and identifying information from customers that could help improve the grocery store. The first step in coding is to open the text of the document you want to work with. To do that, go to the navigation view on the left side of the screen, and under the Files heading, click on Google Reviews. This will display your files in the main workspace. From there, double-click on one of the reviews to open it. We'll start with the review for Quinn, which will open in the main workspace so you can begin reading and coding. To the left of the open document, we still have our list of files showing in the list view. We want to display the codes pane in that space instead. So on the left side of the screen in the navigation view, click on the word Codes under the Coding heading. This will replace the Google Review list in the main workspace with the Codes pane. Some introductory information about codes will appear. Go ahead and click the Close button at the bottom of that pane to dismiss it. You'll now see an empty space where your codes will appear as you create them. Make sure this codes pane stays visible as you work. It can take a bit of getting used to because each time you open a new document, NVivo will default back to the file list and you will need to reopen the codes pane. Okay, so let's take a look at our first review. It reads, double-check the best before dates on any ready-made foods before purchasing here, and be very selective of the ready-made foods. Prices are high. Lots of expired products left on the shelves. At 2 p.m. on a Saturday, the salad bar was mostly withered up. If we look at this paragraph, we can see 2 main concepts: expired food and high prices. Before you begin coding, it's important to think about your approach or methodology. For example, this is a single paragraph, but should we code the whole thing? We could highlight the entire paragraph and assign it to the code expired food, then highlight it again and assign it to high prices. NVivo would keep both references. However, when we later review our coded content, we might find that only the middle sentence is actually about high prices, while the other sentences aren't relevant to that theme. So in this case, it's probably better not to highlight and code the full paragraph. Being selective helps keep your coding more accurate and meaningful. Additionally, in this example, the idea of expired food appears more than once in the same paragraph. Should we code it just once, or highlight and code each mention separately? If we do the latter, expired foods gets counted twice. This matters because when we create codes, we're looking for patterns and trends. The more often a concept appears, the more important it may be to our research. For this project, I'm deciding that each time a concept is mentioned, especially if it's separated by other ideas, I will count it as a separate instance. To assign part of the review to a code, click and drag your mouse to highlight the relevant sentence. In this case, I'm highlighting the text that reads, double-check the best before dates on any ready-made foods before purchasing here. Then drag the highlighted text into the Codes pane on the left side of the screen. A dialog box titled New Code will appear, prompting us to enter a name. We'll call this first code Expired Food, then click OK in the bottom right corner to create it. This records our first instance of a reference to expired food. For users who prefer not to use drag and drop, such as those using a keyboard or assistive technology, there's an alternative method for assigning text to a code. You can right-click on the highlighted text and choose either Code Selection or Code to Recent Codes. We'll demonstrate this approach later on when we work on Olivia's review. Next, I'll highlight the following sentence in the review, which reads, "And be very selective of the ready-made foods, prices are high." Then, drag that highlighted text into an empty area in the Codes pane on the left side of the screen. The dialog box titled New Code will once again appear, prompting us to enter a name. We'll call this code High Prices, and then click OK in the bottom right corner to create it. Now we'll look at the last part of the review and highlight the text that reads, "Lots of expired products on the shelves. At 2 p.m. on a Saturday, the salad bar was mostly withered up. Maybe it's better during weekdays." We'll drag this text over to the Codes pane on the left and drop it into the existing code named Expired Food. That's the drag and drop method of coding. Drag and drop doesn't always work smoothly on Macs, so it's helpful to know alternative approaches to coding in case one method isn't ideal for your setup. For the purposes of coding, we're going to ignore the owner's response to this review since we've already recorded that a response was given in the case attributes. The content of the reply isn't especially useful for identifying customer concerns or areas to improve the store, so we'll move on. I'll close Quinn's review by clicking the X on the tab above the review content, then select the Google Reviews folder in the navigation view. From there, I'll double-click Mohammed's review to open it. Remember, you can use the zoom slider in the bottom right corner of the NVivo window to make the review text easier to read. Let's slide it to the right now to enlarge the text. For this next review, I'll start looking for codes, but my list of codes has disappeared after opening the new file. To bring it back, I'll go to the navigation view on the left and click Codes under the Coding heading. This review begins with the sentence, "Fairly expensive products, most of which you can find for far less elsewhere, and not even that far away." This aligns with our high prices code. Since the next sentence introduces a separate idea, we'll just highlight this one sentence using the mouse, then drag it over to the left and drop it onto the high prices code in the Codes pane. The next sentence says, "Staff aren't overly knowledgeable, but if you catch the right one, you'll get lots of good information." After that, the food bar is great, but since they changed to a self-serve weighing method of charging people, it's definitely not worth the price. We'll come back to the comment about staff in a moment. For now, highlight the sentence about the self-serve food bar and drag it to the Codes pane, dropping it on the high prices code. Now let's look at the line, "Staff aren't overly knowledgeable, but if you catch the right one, you'll get lots of good information." There are potentially two ideas here. Some staff are not very knowledgeable, while others can be helpful. In this case, I'm going to highlight the full sentence and drag it into the empty area of the Codes pane and create a new code. I'll name this one Unknowledgeable Staff, and then click OK in the bottom right corner to create it. In the handout, there's a link that discusses coding and how to name your codes effectively. Sometimes people try to make their codes very detailed, but it's better to keep them short and clear. Pithy titles that give you a good sense of what's included in that category. Avoid being too specific because that can lead to a long list of very similar codes, which often end up needing to be merged later. Be sure to check out the links in the handout for more guidance on naming and organizing your codes. Okay, so we finished going through Mohammed's review and have assigned codes to the relevant parts. Let's close that review by clicking the X on the tab above the review content, and in the next one, I'll show you a different way to code. In the navigation view on the left, under the Data heading, click on Google Reviews. This opens the folder in the main workspace. Now double-click on Olivia's review to open it. Just like before, use the zoom slider in the bottom right corner of the NVivo window to enlarge the text and make it easier to read. This review states, "Prices are high, but the store is spotless. Nice selection of organic and local poultry. Pleasant individuals, crazy amount of health supplements, etc. We're probably not interested in coding comments about health supplements for this project. And just a reminder, you don't have to code everything. You're only looking for examples of text that help support your research question. One common mistake is overcoding, trying to code too much. Later in the workshop, I'll show you how to delete or merge codes if needed. Let's make the codes pane visible again by going to the navigation view on the left and clicking on Codes under the coding heading. Next, we'll highlight the sentence that reads, "Prices are high." This time, instead of dragging and dropping the text into the codes pane, we'll right-click on the highlighted text. From the menu that appears, choose either Code Selection or Code to Recent Codes. Since we're adding this to an existing code, we'll hover over Code to Recent Codes, and then select the High Prices code from the list. This process is similar for Mac users as well. This review also mentions that the store is spotless, which is useful information. So we'll highlight that same line of text again and right-click on it. From the menu that appears, we'll choose the Code Selection option, which will open the dialog box. On the left side of the dialog box, we see a list of existing codes. On the right, we have the option to create a new one. Under the Create New heading on the right, we'll check the box next to the top-level code to create a new standalone code. Once we do that, a new code will appear in the list on the left. We'll give it a name. Let's call this one Clean Store. Then, at the bottom of the dialog box, we'll click the Code Selection to New Code button to finish. This box will close, and back in the main workspace, we'll now see the new code added to our codes pane. The next sentence of the review mentions a nice selection. So we'll highlight that line of text and drag it into an empty space in the codes pane below the existing codes. A dialog box will appear prompting us to name the new code. We'll enter Good Selection and click OK in the bottom right corner to save it. Next, the review mentions that the staff were pleasant. The sentence reads, "Pleasant individuals working there when I went in today." We'll highlight that sentence, drag it onto the empty space in the codes pane, and name the new code Pleasant Individuals. That completes our coding for Olivia's review. Let's close it by clicking the X on the tab above the review content and move on to Sam's review. To do that, return to the navigation view on the left side of the screen. Under the Data heading, click on Google Reviews to display the folder in the main workspace. Then double-click on the review titled Sam to open it. Use the zoom slider in the bottom right corner of the screen to enlarge the text for easier reading. As we've done before, reopen the Codes pane by going back to the navigation view and clicking on Codes under the coding heading. This review reads, "The store had a fairly large selection of natural, vegan, etc. products, with a food/coffee bar at the back." Since this relates to selection, we'll highlight the sentence and drag it to the left, dropping it onto the existing Good Selection code in the Codes pane. The next sentence mentions dissatisfaction with some of the selection. We'll highlight that line and drag it into the empty space in the Codes pane. When the dialog box appears, we'll name the new code Poor Selection and click the OK button in the bottom right corner to save it. The last line of the review says, "Wouldn't really consider it worth the price." So we'll highlight the full sentence and drag it over to our existing code called High Prices. Also, when selecting information to code, it's generally best to highlight at least the full sentence, rather than just part of it. For example, if you only highlight the final phrase, that's all you will see when reviewing your coded content later. Including the full sentence helps provide better context for your analysis. We've now finished with Sam's review and can close it by clicking the X on the tab above the review content. Now we'll move on to our final one, Shahira's. Just like with the previous reviews, we'll open it by going to the navigation view on the left side of the screen, clicking on Google Reviews under the Data heading, and then double-clicking on the review titled Shahira. Once it's open in the main workspace, we'll zoom in on the text using the slider in the bottom right corner of the screen. Then, as before, we'll reopen the Codes pane by clicking on Codes under the coding heading in the navigation view. This review is a bit longer. The first sentence mentions reducing packaging, followed by a comment about friendly employees. It then circles back to reducing packaging again, and near the end, there's mention of expired food. Let's start by highlighting the second sentence of the review, which talks about friendly employees. We could easily include friendly employees under the existing code, Pleasant Individuals. However, I'm going to create a new similar code called friendly employees to show you later how to collapse codes. If we were being efficient though, we might drag this text directly into pleasant individuals since they cover the same idea. So we'll drag this highlighted sentence over to the blank area in the codes pane and drop it, which will prompt us to create a new code. We'll title this Friendly Employees and click OK on the bottom right of the box. The first sentence of the review mentions packaging, and later there's a larger section that discusses it again. To stay consistent in our coding, we'll count both mentions. I'll highlight the first sentence, which reads, "Be our leader in reducing unnecessary packaging," and drag and drop it into the blank spot in the codes pane. When prompted, we'll name this new code packaging and click OK at the bottom right corner of the box. Next, we'll move to the third sentence and highlight the entire section that ends with, "We appreciate the bulk section and returnable bottle items, wishing there were more." Then we'll drag and drop this entire passage onto the existing packaging code in the codes pane on the left. Lastly, the end two sentences of the review are about expired food, so we'll highlight that entire section and drag and drop it onto our existing expired food code within the codes pane. We can now exit out of this review by clicking X on Shahira's review located above the review content. We've now finished coding, and it's time to review our coding table. Let's close the last open tab, the one titled Person, in the main workspace by clicking the X at the right side of the tab. This will give us a wider view of the coding table spanning the entire main workspace. You can check this table anytime during your research to spot trends as they emerge. In the main workspace, we see a table with column headings like names, file, reference, as well as details about when each code was created or modified and by whom. The Files column tells us how many individual documents a particular code appears in. In our case, how many different reviews mentions that code. For example, High Prices appears in 4 out of 5 files. Expired Food appears in 2. Good Selection shows up in 2, and so on. The remaining codes seem to be unique to individual files with only one review mentioning each of them. The Reference column shows how many individual chunks of text were assigned to a given code. For example, 5 pieces of text were coded to High Prices, and those 5 came from 4 different reviews. So far, the most frequently referenced topics appear to be high prices, expired food, good selection, and packaging. This gives us an early indication of the main themes emerging from the data. Now that we've created our codes, let's talk about what comes next. Coding is an iterative process, especially when you're working with a lot more data than we are today. It's not something you'll complete in one sitting. You might return to your project over days, weeks, or even months. Each time you revisit it, your thinking may shift, and your list of codes could continue to grow. That's why it's important to pause regularly and ask yourself, do I still need all of these codes? Think of it this way. When you're writing a paper, you often gather a bunch of examples to support your argument. Some end up fitting well with your thesis, while others no longer feel relevant and get left out. Coding works the same way. You're collecting examples that support your research focus, and over time you might decide to keep some and discard others. The first thing we want to do is look at our list of codes and ask, are there any that are similar enough to be merged? For example, I used the term pleasant individuals in one review and friendly employees in another, just following the language used in each review. But really, they refer to the same concept. So I want to merge pleasant individuals and friendly employees into a single code, which I'll name friendly employees. In the Windows version of NVivo, you do this by right-clicking on the code you want to dissolve, pleasant individuals, within the coding table, and select Cut from the list of options. After cutting, you'll notice the item is grayed out. On a Mac, you'll right-click and choose Copy instead. Next, I'll right-click on Friendly Employees in the coding table and select the option Merge into Selected Code. A dialog box will appear with options like Append Linked Memos, Copy Relationships, and Copy See Also Links, all enabled by default. We'll leave these as they are and click OK in the bottom right corner to complete the merge. With these settings left unchanged, any memos or related items attached to the code being merged won't be deleted. Instead, they'll be combined with the memos of the new code, ensuring nothing gets lost during the merge. You'll notice that Pleasant Individuals has now disappeared from the list, and friendly employees shows that it has 2 files and 2 references. That tells us the merge was successful. Both instances of the same concept are now combined under one code. On a Mac, to merge codes, right-click on Pleasant Individuals and select Copy, then right-click on Friendly Employees and choose Merge with Selected Code. After completing the merge, you will need to manually delete the Pleasant Individuals code, as this step is not automatic on a Mac. If you decide to rename a code, for example, changing Friendly Employees to Helpful Employees, the process differs slightly between Windows and Mac. On Windows, you can left-click the code name, pause briefly, then click again to edit it directly, much like renaming a file during everyday computer use. On a Mac, you would right-click the code name and select Info from the menu, which opens an options pane where you can change the name. That's how you simply change the name of a code. But what if you want to delete a code? For example, if you have many codes with only one reference each, you might decide they are no longer useful. To delete a code, right-click on it and select Delete from the options that appear. You won't be doing that in this project, but it's useful to know. Now that we've tidied up our codes, I want to take a closer look at what was said about high prices. To do this, simply double-click on the high prices code. This will open a new pane called the Details view to the right of the coding table. Here you can see the 4 different files and the specific references assigned to this code. We can see exactly what was said. This feature is very useful when you want to revisit your coded data and review the exact content tied to each code. Let's close the Details view by clicking the X on the right side of the tab, then return to working with the coding table. Now we're going to create hierarchies by setting up parent codes, also called parent themes. In this example, we'll create 2 parent codes, one called Positive Feedback and the other Negative Feedback. To create the first parent code, right-click in an empty area of the coding table and select New Code. The New Code dialog box will appear. A helpful tip is to name parent codes in all caps to make them easy to distinguish. In the Name field, type Positive Feedback in all capitals, then click OK. Next, to create the second parent code, right-click again on the empty area of the coding table and select New Code once more. When the New Code dialog box appears, type Negative Feedback in all capitals in the Name field, then click OK. You should now have 2 parent codes in your coding table, Positive Feedback and Negative Feedback. At this point, they don't have any files or references assigned. To organize your codes under these parents, simply click and drag them into the appropriate parent code. Let's start with the Good Selection code. I'll click and drag it into the Positive Feedback parent. Next, we have High Prices and Expired Foods, which are both negative. I can select both by clicking one, holding Control on my keyboard, and clicking the last file, then dragging and dropping them both into the Negative Feedback parent. Then we have Helpful Employees. I'll click and drag this into Positive Feedback. Finally, there's Packaging. Actually, I should have named this Poor Packaging, since the feedback was critical. I can fix this now by clicking on the code title, pausing briefly, clicking again, and renaming it to Poor Packaging. This is a real-life example of why it's important to assign clear and accurate names to your codes. I'll click on the newly renamed item once more, then drag and drop it into the Negative Feedback parent. Next, we have Unknowledgeable Staff, which we'll drag into Negative Feedback. Then Clean Store is positive, so we'll drag it into Positive Feedback. Finally, Poor Selection is negative, so we'll drag it into Negative Feedback. Now you can see the hierarchy we've created. This structure is useful because later, when analyzing the data, we can look at it and compare all positive feedback as a whole versus all negative feedback. One more important step when creating these hierarchies is to update the number of files and references for the parent codes. Right now, if we compare positive and negative, both show 0 files and references in our coding table, so we wouldn't get any meaningful results. To fix this, right-click on the parent code and select the option Aggregate Coding from Children. This will summarize and add up the files and references for all the child codes underneath it. We can now see that Positive Feedback code shows a total of 3 files and 5 references. That might seem a little confusing at first, But keep in mind that some codes, like helpful employees, may appear more than once within the same file, so NVivo is counting each instance behind the scenes. Next, I'll right-click on negative feedback and choose Aggregate Coding from Children. This will update the counts for that parent code as well. If someone asked how many files included negative feedback, we can now see that 5 reviews contain negative feedback, while 3 included positive feedback. You can also click the minus icon to the left of both positive feedback and negative feedback to collapse those categories and simplify the view. So that wraps up our looking at coding in NVivo. In this video, we walked through how to create and assign codes to your data, how to merge and rename them, and how to organize codes into hierarchies using parent themes. We also looked at how to view the references behind each code and how to interpret the coding table. When you're ready, move on to the next video where we'll continue building on this project.